President Trump's crime crackdown on D.C. is working. Republican members of Congress, they've proposed several pieces of legislation to help him out, to even extend that 30 days of control to as much as 6 months. They're back in session next week, but will they extend that control before the September 10th deadline? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Jim Baird. He serves on the three House committees, including the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he represents the 4th Congressional District of Indiana. Congressman, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you. Appreciate you being.
Of course. So before we dive into the D.C. crime crackdown, which I'm very interested in, I do want to get your thoughts on this tragic shooting Wednesday in Minneapolis.
You know, it's always heartbreaking to see little kids, 8 and 11-year-olds, and then actually killed, and then several others wounded. Your heart goes out to those families, and we certainly want to support them and support them with prayer and support them with any other means that we can to help them get through this difficult period. But it's just a senseless situation. And you mentioned earlier that it really gets into the mental health situation. Mm-hmm. That we need to recognize that we need to provide opportunities for people to have the kind of help they need to get through the not doing or make them stop doing that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I think you're right about that. It's an unsolved problem so far. I don't think we talk enough about it. You mentioned the prayer. What do you make of this kind of backlash from so many on the left now against prayer? I don't think it's, prayer and action are not mutually exclusive, and often the former fuels the latter. What do you make of this?
Well, I think prayers do work. And I think that if you can't understand that and realize that God's there for you to share whatever you would like with Him, but He's always there, and prayers do work.
Well, I couldn't amen that more, and that's a good note to end on when we talk about that topic. And I do want to turn to what's going on in D.C. Of course, we're based here in D.C. We're seeing what's going on every day. And there's been some controversy, but what President Trump is doing with the National Guard and the federal agents is clearly working. Even the D.C. mayor admitted as much. And now we have a new AP poll, which found that the majority of Americans actually approve of what President Trump is doing, despite all the backlash and the loudness from the vocal minority. Are you surprised that he's got that support?
Not at all. I think many of us feel like that it's important to have a safe capital, and some of these other cities really need to be safe where they're enduring the killing and all the sort of homicides that are taking place, and then the police's hands are tied so they can't really get involved or do anything about it to any major commitment. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that we're seeing that, and the crime now has just gotten so bad that it begs the help, especially, President Trump mentioned Baltimore. I can't think of a city that I feel less safe in than Baltimore. And I've traveled around the world and been some, quote unquote, dangerous places. And honestly, Baltimore, just north of DC, has felt less safe than many of them. But at the same time, I feel this question of, at what point is it federal overreach to be sending federal agents and the National Guard to these cities? So how do we think about this issue? We want to deal with crime. It's worked in D.C., but we also want to be wary of federal overreach. How do you think about that, Congressman?
Well, it's important. It's important that the criminal element sees that we are going to do something about them preying on our people in these various cities. And so sometimes you have to use significant force for them to get the message. And if we're not going to back up our police, then the next thing is to use the National Guard. And so we can still get the kind of enforcement that we need when we enforce our laws. And that makes them respect the community and be
right. Yeah, I think the respect is key, and it's interesting you mentioned enforcing the laws, because part of the problem here is so many Democratic mayors and Democratic governments, local, state, are just not enforcing the laws. Prosecutors aren't prosecuting. And so it's putting us in a difficult position where we might have to choose between sending federal agents to do something that really the local prosecutors and local governments should be doing, but it may be changing. The president's approach is working, and even California Governor Gavin Newsom, he may be copying him. So yesterday, Newsom announced a new plan. He's deploying California's highway patrol. He's calling them the crime suppression teams. He's sending them all over the state to prevent crime and promote public safety. It seems like Newsom is copying Trump a lot lately. So some Democrats aren't happy about what Trump is doing, and he's done in D.C. and other cities. But it seems like Newsom is copying him. How are Democrats supposed to react on this issue where Trump is kind of is winning?
Well, I have tremendous respect for our law enforcement and even our state troopers here in Indiana, as well as other states. And so when you have the backup that they need in order to do their job, that's extremely important. And, you wouldn't want to go out there and risk your life every day,
Right.
If you didn't have the backup. And that's just like the military. When you got a commander in chief that will back you up, just like President Trump, then everyone recognizes how important that is. And you certainly wouldn't be willing to go as willing anyway, to go forward in a dangerous situation like that if you really didn't feel like you had the backup. And I think it's extremely important that we support our law enforcement. And this country is a country of laws, and we need to make sure that we can enforce that.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be discouraging for these officers. And I've talked to some of them who say, I'm risking my life, I'm arresting people, and then the prosecutors aren't even prosecuting in many cases. Or, I mean, some of these guys, they know that if they go to a certain judge, they're just not going to get a conviction, no matter how much evidence they have, because some of the judges have become so politicized. So that's got to be, as you said, discouraging for law enforcement to risk their lives when the system is not backing them up.
I can't imagine, that catch and release kind of idea where you catch them for maybe with a lot of evidence, and then you take them to jail and they go through the process and they're back out on the street a short time later. And so that would be very frustrating to me, and I think it's very frustrating to law enforcement officers.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. So looking ahead, Congress is returning from August recess. You've got the NDAA, you've got border security. What should we look for coming out of Congress these next few weeks as you come back from recess?
Well, I think we got to keep the momentum going, and I think we've got to make sure that we pass. I'd like to see us pass all 12 appropriations bill as we move into the 26th fiscal year, and I think it's going to be opportunity for us to really fine tune and tweak our budget process. And by the way, the 25 cut out about $25 billion, and this 26 proposal, I think, is going to cut out another $45 billion. So we're interested in helping reduce the spending, as well as making sure that we provide a sufficient funding for all those programs that are beneficial and really involve.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned those cuts. Yeah, I'm glad you brought those up. Those were seen as a big win and a hard-fought win, but it sounds like you think there could be even more spending cuts coming even this year?
Well, this last time we focused on waste, fraud, and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so the DOJ folks uncovered and discovered things that we probably need to continue to look at and evaluate and make sure that we have sufficient and proper oversight.
Yeah, I want to get your reaction to one more topic on on defense and what's going on overseas. We had these new developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. Of course, President Trump met with Putin in Alaska, and they had these big meetings and different things. But then we haven't necessarily seen Putin changing his behavior yet. We've seen big strikes on Kiev that were some of the largest since the war began. What do you make of that? Should we give up hope on Russia, or do you think that there is still hope?
I'm not sure that there's always hope. You gotta pray for peace and so on. But when you look at Putin and what he's done and how many people that he sent into the battle that ended up as cannon fodder is amazing to me. And I don't support continuing that. They were the ones that attacked the Ukrainians. I do admire the Ukrainians for their willingness and ability to push back. And and last as long as no one probably thought going up against Russia that they would last this long, but they have. So I admire their commitment to and protect their country and move forward.
Yeah, it is admirable. And I think any of us would do the same, of course, if our country were at stake. It raises an interesting question of what is the U.S. role and how can we support them? There's a lot of questions about that. And it seems like, at least for now, President Trump's meeting with Putin has not yielded the results that many of us hope for, but it's not too late. Congressman Jim Baird of Indiana, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.